in us, and it's almost impossible to start any lessons by the end of, or not by the end, by the beginning of the school year if you do not create the right atmosphere. And we're having wonderful Julie Stolyarchuk, who's going to tell us all about how to get off on the right foot with your teaching practice this school year. So let's welcome Julie with a warm applause.
Hello, hello. Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. And thank you for these wonderful energizers. Now, if I could please get the opportunity to share my screen, that would be very helpful so that I can show you my presentation. Okay, perfect. All right. Here we go. So, if you ask a student at the end of the academic year what they liked the most about their interaction with you, about their interaction with the group, your course that you've been teaching them, students invariably say something like, it was the great atmosphere, or a warm atmosphere or a welcoming atmosphere. The word atmosphere is usually present in one of these descriptions. And I believe this is such a common answer that we often take it for granted. And Yelena was just talking about how important it is to build these connections between students in order for this to work. And that's going to be a big part of what I'm going to be talking about today. The question that I would like us to answer is, how do we get to the stage where students feel like, you know what, we have a great atmosphere. It is a fantastic place, this group or this course. My name is Julie Stolyarchuk, and all you need to know about me is that I teach high levels at the Polina Kordik School of English, which means that most of my students aren't teachers themselves. That's why I have a huge interest in teacher development. I've branched out into methodology and written some courses around that. And Mitra Nikitin and I also have written a book for teachers who are interested in their continuing professional development. So teachers are very close to my heart. And of course, I am a teacher myself. So allow me to share with you my woeful tale. I've been teaching for over 10 years, but even just 2 years ago, I remember joining my first Zoom class of the academic year and feeling completely disoriented. So it's like my students were all there, the links were all set up, but I couldn't quite remember what to do. I didn't immediately remember when to give the instructions. And some of the students surprised me by having their cameras off in this Zoom class, even though it seemed obvious to me that this was a cameras on class. So what I'd like to offer you today is essentially a checklist. The checklist I wish I had had 2 years ago when I was feeling disoriented in that class, something to help you start your classes right so that you've got the right mechanics from the get-go so that you can then develop this into something that your students will call a welcoming atmosphere and a great group. And I hope it'll be useful to you. Now, a book that I'm going to be heavily relying on today is a wonderful book called Engaging Language Learners in Contemporary Classrooms by the late Zoltan Dernier, who was one of the best researchers on motivation, and his student, Sarah Mercer. And I think this is going to be like my teaching Bible this year, because it's got so many fantastic tips on how to deal with the challenges we face today with shrinking attention spans. I think the only thing it really doesn't cover is AI, but that's partly what this conference is for as well. So, one piece of advice that the authors of this book give is that for a good team spirit, it is advisable that teachers make tea. The authors are very big on acronyms, and of course, T is also an acronym that stands for trust, empathy, and acceptance. And it may seem like it's a little too simplistic. It's like, congratulations, Julie, you have reinvented the wheel. We need trust, empathy, and acceptance for our classrooms. But hear me out. This has some very serious research to back it up. In a 2004 paper by Hart and Hobson, they write, studies show that such increased safety and trust result in more cooperation, less conflict, and fewer verbal put-downs in the classroom. Sounds like a welcoming atmosphere to me. And if that's not enough, because, you know, as Yelena was also saying, we don't just want to ensure that our classroom, you know, people in our classroom know each other very well and interact very well. We are interested in their progress. And here I've also got good news for you, because they write, in addition, better scores on standardized achievement tests and improved ability to acquire skills have been reported. So all of this stems from these three seemingly simple things: trust, empathy, and acceptance. The big question is, how? How do we get there? So here are my little suggestions for you and for myself. Things to think about, some food for thought for the beginning of the academic year. Now, when it comes to building trust, I think we as teachers know to start with ourselves. So my first suggestion is to be prepared, right? That can take many forms, from very simple things to, have you updated your Zoom or your online platform? Things are changing at a breakneck pace. So are you on top of these changes? Do you know what you are sending your students, where you're sending them? Are there any settings that you need to fix, maybe from last year? I remember spending all of last year with a weird conference setting on Zoom, where whenever I joined a conference, my video would be off, but my microphone would be on. And it's, you know, it took me a second to adjust it, but it was just this extra annoyance at the beginning of every class. So that's something that I've tracked, and I know that this year I've already set up my conferences in a different way. Are there any little things that annoyed you last academic year that you can fix quite easily? Do you remember where all of your materials are? And connected to that, have you updated your lesson plans? Because I hope we've all been there, because I remember just last year, I was thinking to myself, so I had this amazing lesson plan that went so smoothly with the group the previous year. I'm just going to reuse it. And then I open it 5 minutes before the class is set to start. And I realized that the reason it had worked so well and so seamlessly that previous year was because I took the time to add some really relevant examples, right? Something that was relevant to that particular year, perhaps relevant to those particular learners. So it's a really good idea to make sure you read your lesson plans in good time, so that you have time to make any necessary adjustments. All of this is essential because when we are building trust, you know, the way it works, they say it takes two to tango, right? Or it's a two-way street, or whichever metaphor you prefer. We as teachers do our part so that our learners can meet us halfway. You know, we do whatever is expected of us, and then we can have expectations of our learners. Which brings me to the next point, and that is prepare your learners, right? I think this part is more about empathy. One of the definitions of empathy being the ability to see a situation from another person's perspective, right? Empathy is the ability to put ourselves in somebody's shoes. So it's quite useful to do this as a mental exercise. Before you start with a new group, think of yourself as one of them. Like, what would they want to know? What would they need from you in order to be successful, in order to feel good, right? And it's so great when these kinds of expectations are set from the get-go rather than as an afterthought. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So some questions for this checklist. Do they know how to navigate their learning environment? In other words, again, do they have the links that they need to join your classes? Do they know whom to communicate with when they've got a question and what channels of communication you'll be using, right? Do they know which questions they can ask you in private and which they can ask you in class? Is there a special place reserved for their questions, right? Do they know what your expectations are? I mentioned that student who came to class with her camera off, even though I thought it was obvious. You know, we're a small group. It's essential for group rapport for people to at least be able to see each other's faces if they're planning some kind of long-term involvement with one another. And yet I realized perhaps I had not been clear enough. Perhaps I did not highlight how important that was. So it's great if you have some sort of letter, perhaps, that you send to your learners, or a post that you make for them all to read, where you talk through these little things. And that will require some thinking, some analysis on your part. You know, think of what was important to you last year. Was there anything last academic year that maybe unpleasantly surprised you and you thought that it was obvious, but apparently not obvious enough to the learners, right? Okay. Connected to this is there a system of classroom rules in place? What we like to do at our language school is, because it's 100% online, we have like a private VK group for our learners, and we'll actually make a post where we'll ask them which rules they think should be included. And this is an opportunity for them to comment and to feel like they are making a contribution, and not just feel like they're making a contribution, but actually do it. Because once it's like a little logical fallacy of ours, of human beings, that we can use to our advantage. And that is, if we have invested in something, and I don't necessarily mean money, this could be time and effort, we feel more connected to it, because it's not just something on the sidelines, it's something I was directly involved with. So I am a huge believer in setting classroom rules. I'm sure many of you already do this, right? And another thing that I like to do at the beginning of the year is to have students share their aims for the course, right? Because then that's something tangible that you can return to at the end of the academic year, and then check whether they've attained their aim. So it's nice to have them in writing, and maybe in some kind of shared space. Moving on to acceptance, respect to the person and their time. And the first question here is, do you know all of your learners' names? Because that's the first thing that helps us single out a person in a mass of humans. Imagine you're standing on a bus stop, right? All of these people waiting with you are just a mass of humans. But if you learned somebody's name, they would stand out. Same goes for any kind of group interaction. Another simple one is being punctual. Your students will thank you if you start and finish on time, because let's face it, regardless of whether it's a child or an adult, they've probably got a pretty tight schedule. That's what life is today. And it's very respectful to start and finish on time, right? Another thing that I want to become better at is learning something about each one of my students in each class. And sometimes I'll even make notes. I'll have a little file where I write notes throughout the academic year. At the end of the class, I'll just jot down. It could be an experience that a student has shared. It could be something cool they did in class. And when I keep that file, by the time rolls around for us to have individual consultations with them, or simply, when I want to write them a thank you note at the end of the academic year, I know what to write because I've been following them and I've been following their progress, and not just their language progress, but also their person. I feel that students do care about this connection that they have with you as the teacher. So all of these things can help build rapport between you and the learners, but there's something even more important, and I'll share a little bit of research with you. In a big study by Johnson & Johnson in 2017, they discovered that 33% of student achievement is explained by, I'll give you a second to think what might go in there. It's explained by peer relationships. It is the relationships that happen between the learners themselves that will help create not just the friendly and warm atmosphere, but also real results and great academic outcomes. And that's why my final point and my final section of the checklist is going to be about building relationships, right? Do the learners know each other's names is perhaps even more important than do you know all of theirs, right? Have they singled each other out in this mass of human beings? Do they have a shared space? This could be a chat, this could be a group. They need to have a space to interact outside of the classes. I'm not saying they're going to immediately jump into it and use it, but it's great if they have that space. And one thing that we have found super effective is the study buddy system. We encourage learners to find someone in their group or in another group that they will meet up maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, but regularly, to do homework together, to do speaking sessions together. People who have a study buddy, it's almost like a gym partner. People who have a gym partner statistically tend to stick to their exercise routine longer than those who try to do it on their own. In the same way, they're more likely to stick to their preparation. In our case, it's exam preparation to the end if they've got someone to share that experience with. And sometimes they'll even meet lifelong friends in this fashion. So this is something that's highly recommended as well. So all of this, it is my hope that it will help you make tea in your classroom, generate that warmth, that trust, that acceptance and empathy, so that your learners can have better relationships and better learning outcomes. This is where you can find me. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you can use this checklist as a little food for thought to make a really effective start to your classes this year and get off on the right foot with your learners.